And we are live, straight from, again, rainy Amsterdam to your home offices. This is the first edition of the community office hours for the vault provider for Terraform. My name is Kerim Satirli. I'm a developer advocate for Hashicorp, where I focus on Terraform. And I'm joined today by fellow developer advocate Rob Barnes and Clint Shryock. So, Clint, let's start with you. You're a senior software engineer at Hashicorp. What do you do on a daily basis?
Daily basis, my responsibilities are working in the Vault ecosystem. So I work on integrations between the Vault software product and platforms or other environments, Amazon, GCP, but also identity things or things people have set up in their infrastructure. Basically, we are the area between Vault and their software they're running or platforms they're using.
Awesome, thank you. And Rob, for the folks that missed the Vault office hours and have never had a chance to meet you, what do you do at HashiCorp?
Amazing. Thank you for joining firstly. So like Kerim, I'm a developer advocate. I focus mainly on Vault. So in terms of being a developer advocate, some of the main things I do is kind of learn the product, teach the product, try to help make it better. So I listen to the community quite a bit. I work with the community and I work with the developers to help improve the experience with Vault. I mean, it's already awesome, but things can always be better. So it's kind of my job to represent both sides of the same coin.
Thank you. That helps. Yeah, security products are definitely a hard one to get into and a hard one to get right and an easy one to not get right. So I'm curious, before we get into the community questions, what's the biggest gotcha or caveat that you encounter in your daily life, Clint, where you think more people should know about this?
About using Vault specifically?
Vault or the Vault provider?
Well, something about the Vault provider that we've always had difficulty kind of reconciling is Terraform likes to store everything in state, and Vault likes to keep things secret. So you have this like chicken egg problem sometimes of you want to use Terraform to manage your infrastructure, and Vault is part of that. But part of that for Vault's case could be putting sensitive things into it, right? So you obviously don't want that written into state for anyone or anyone who has permission to run the Terraform things to see. So having Terraform configure Vault and the things it needs to have for your infrastructure or your teams to use it, but to keep those things secure is kind of like these two opposing factors there. So secure introduction is something that's kind of not necessarily hard, but it is something you need to pay a lot of attention to when you get started with Vault. And I think some people jump in and think, oh, well, we can use the provider for that, but then it kind of prolongs the problem by potentially having these things in state. Or you end up doing a bunch of gymnastics where you put things in state originally, and then you somehow remove them from Terraform so that they're no longer in the state, and then you have to also change them in Vault so they're not there in historical records or something. So that's always a tricky thing that I think some people don't always get at first.
Yeah, secrets in state is definitely one of the problems that we encounter a lot. I think Rob and I, we had a presentation a couple days ago where people were talking about state and how you have all your secrets in there. And I think it's always good to remember that Terraform state, despite not feeling like a secret, should definitely be treated as sensitive material. So that's definitely, I think, my number one tip to give people. Rob, how about you? You're working on the intersection of Vault and Terraform as well. What's your favorite gotcha?
It's kind of along similar lines to what Clint said. I've worked with a lot of people in the past that are using Terraform Enterprise, and they want to use Terraform to configure Vault. But we go to a slightly different chicken and egg problem, is when you're using Terraform Enterprise, it actually uses Vault under the hood to encrypt the state files. So it relies on Vault being there in the first place. So you kind of have this circular dependency. Now, there are ways around that. But I think as long as you're aware that you have that potential to get into that circular dependency, you can implement things that make your life a little bit easier there. And just on some of the points that Clint mentioned around secure introduction. Clint is absolutely correct to everything he said. It's actually a wider thing when it comes to software and application security altogether. Secure introduction is hard. There's no silver bullet for that. It's all about what you trust to introduce secret zero, and that would be different from one organization to the other. So it's something you should pay a lot of attention to.
Awesome. And so to be super clear for our audience, what is secure introduction and what is secret zero?
I'll give this one a stab. So when you have, we use Vault, for example, when you have a security platform like that, which is going to broker access to other platforms, you first need to authenticate against that platform itself, which is Vault. In order to do that, you need to pass the thing that's going to authenticate against it some kind of credentials. So that could be a username and password. It could be some kind of certificate, or it could be maybe an app pro ID, and you have the logic built into an application. But you need a secure way to pass these credentials, if you like, to the application. You don't want to store that in your source code, obviously. And then you have things like environment variables, which is deemed acceptable to some and unacceptable to others. Kind of differs from one organization to another. So you need some way to give it that main secret so that the application can then go and get the other secrets from Vault. So when I talk about secret zero, it's the one that gives you the keys to get in the other secrets.
That is very helpful. Thank you. So Clint, question for you maybe. What's the best way of using the Vault provider for Terraform to do the initial setup? Like, how do I present my credentials to it, the tokens?
You're talking about using the provider, not using the provider to configure Vault. You're talking about talking to Vault, right?
Yes. So we've got a setup Vault, and we want Terraform to talk to it and set up the provider for it.
Generally, to get started, we generally recommend using things like environment variables, if possible. The Vault provider will use different authentication methods. You can configure the provider block to say, like use an app role type approach, or I believe you can also use any other of the authentication methods that we should support. Honestly, I would have to look it up in the provider block. So part tying into the discussion of like secure introduction and such, with Vault, the whole model has been really enabled people to use identity as the secret access, as opposed to like membership of like inside a physical building or something, right? We've gone beyond being in a data center, proving that you're a member or allowed to have these things, to we're in a dynamic cloud, so we're gonna we don't know where we're gonna be. So really trying to leverage things like on Amazon, like instance profiles, things that come with the machines that we trust Amazon to put there, and then Vault leveraging that as means of authenticating. So it depends on your environment, really. Like if you're running it on your desktop, I would recommend like environment variables. I have personally, I'm on a Mac. I use a program that will take keys out of the macOS keychain and inject them into my shell whenever I start a certain project. There's also Hashicorp has an internal service that helps with some of this too. But if you are running Terraform on a platform or on a CI, I would absolutely use at least environment variables if that's your best option. Like Circle CI or Travis, I know, will let you encrypt environment variables. Other than that, I would try to leverage any of the authentication methods that we have available that would use a provider's identity that the provider itself or the platform itself injects into the environment, and you can leverage that. Yeah, you definitely don't want to just go with like passwords that are somewhere on the file system.
I see Rob smiling. I'm pretty sure you've encountered this before, Rob.
Yes. So I think what Clint has just said, it kind of just made my point a little bit. So the point I was making earlier on, it's about what you trust. So he mentioned Circle CI gives you the ability to encrypt some values there, and you can inject it that way. So if you trust Circle CI, that's a great way of doing secure introduction. Some companies might not trust that. You just have to kind of look at your security model of your organization. You have to find out what the business deems as acceptable, and then you can go with something like that. But definitely, I would imagine wherever you go, it wouldn't be acceptable to have your passwords just sprawled all over your code bases or in plain text for people to see. So, I mean, even in development, I try to not do that because accidents happen. You can accidentally commit that to Git. So environment variables locally as well is definitely the way to go. But yeah, I pretty much echo everything that Clint is saying.
I think you touch upon an interesting point here. We're talking about different layers of protection, making sure everything is, as compartmentalized as possible. Which brings me to one of my favorite features of Vault. Most folks start out with the static secrets, but pretty quickly after you delve into dynamic secrets. So can we talk a little bit about that and the way it works in a generic frame? So not specific to AWS, but just in general, like my Terraform requires a dynamic secret. How does that go through Vault? What happens, and how does it happen?
Talking about outside of Terraform or inside or both?
Consuming them from Terraform, but I would think that the process isn't necessarily different if you consume them from Vault outside of Terraform.
So, well, there's an important little detail there that I'll get to. Just talking about Vault in general, for background, the idea of a dynamic secret is basically you don't want to imagine you have an application and you're running it in a auto-scaling environment, and you start with 3 nodes, and the platform decides, oh, we need 10. Well, those new nodes spin up and they need credentials. So something you don't want to do is give them all the same credentials that are hard-coded, right? That's a potential leak. That's a lot of things to possibly be aware of. And so the idea is when these things come up, they can communicate with Vault and say, hey, I'm a web server, or I am this, I need this kinds of credentials. And then Vault will have the configured account such that when it gets this request, it will create a new set of dynamic credentials that are scoped to live a certain amount of time. So a canonical example here is database credentials. I want to talk to the database. Here's a new username and password for you, and it's going to last for 5 minutes or however long you've configured it, right? And so that gives operators an audit trail. They can know that by comparing logs, they know that this instance requested these credentials at this time. It's tied to this role, and it should have this access. And then the idea is that the web process or whatever process you're using does its work, and then it goes away. It either asks to extend the credentials if it needs to, but if it doesn't, if it just disappears, Vault will automatically revoke them after the 5 minutes. So that's the really quick and dirty thing of dynamic credentials. Now, when you apply that to a Terraform world is when I think things get a little bit unintuitive. Terraform is a declarative system. So you, in configuration, you say, I want these things. I want a web server, I want a database server. And it's very, it's just that, it's declarative. And so Terraform reconciles that with the real world. It talks to the platforms in question and says, okay, I'm going to make these things. This is your plan. Here you go. Terraform wants these things to stay in state and stay consistent, at least according to the configuration. If your platform drifts and you run Terraform plan, it's going to say, hey, your platform is different than your configuration. Here's what I would do to reconcile, but then it's up to the operator to say, oh, I actually want these things, and it will codify them or it'll reapply the configuration and fix those things. Dynamic credentials don't fit very well into that model because they're not supposed to stick around. They're supposed to be short-lived. You don't want dynamic credentials that are supposed to be around for 2 years. That's an anti-pattern, right? So instead of making Terraform resources for those things, most of Terraform, the Vault Terraform providers, dynamic credentials are done in what are called data sources. And so in Terraform world, or Terraform nomenclature, Terraform words, data sources are things that already exist that you're not going to create, but I want to get information from. So in another example, like an Amazon example, you could say, I want to create some resources, but my team isn't allowed to make a VPC, but I can use another one. So you could use a data center to get information from an existing VPC if you knew the name and possibly like criteria like tags. So like a sub team could create things inside that VPC, but not actually manage the VPC themselves, right? So they use that ID to get that information. The thing with dynamic credentials in Vault is that those things don't exist until you ask for them. Whereas in the other example I just gave, the Amazon VPC does exist. So in data sources for dynamic credentials, we actually ask for them, and then Vault goes and creates them and then returns this information as if they always existed. The interesting thing there, though, is the next time you run that plan, you're going to get a different response there. As opposed to the Amazon example, you'll get the same VPC information there, assuming nothing changed. Every Terraform plan with a dynamic credential data source is going to give you a new set of things. So ideally, the way you're using them will flow nicely into the next thing, which won't cause future like plan differences. That could be really bad if it was like if you were using a data source's username as input to another thing. That's probably bad because that username is meant to change or not live for very long. So they still work great, and we use them frequently. I'm using them in a project that we'll deploy today. But it's just kind of it's different than normal data sources because they don't actually exist until you do the plan. And then when you actually execute the plan, their values are going to be different anyway. So it's a little tricky compared to normal data sources or in other providers.
These are super good insights. And I feel that we're talking about the 102 or even maybe 201 level already of things. So I'd like to take a step back and talk about the 101 level. Let's say we're going back to static secrets. We're using the key value engine version 2 because we like that. What's a good way of setting up secrets there? Do you have any advice, either of you, on what should my path be? How should I name my path? What are some good things to keep in mind?
I can take a stab at this. So I've deployed Vault in enough organizations to know that you can set up a path structure, which you would normally look at the way that your business operates, your different business units and how you divide that up and projects and so on and so forth. And you try to design a path structure which matches that. And that's a good way to go. But you should also recognize that businesses evolve as well. You have restructures that happen all the time. And when you have these restructures, the path methodology that you've implemented probably doesn't quite match the new look business structure. So there is going to be that kind of overhead, if you like, of keeping up with the Joneses there. You have to always make sure that your path structure kind of follows that. So some organizations, as a result of that, they don't really base their pathing structure or namespaces, if you use an enterprise, on maybe business units. They rather base it on products or services. So if you have, I don't know, if you're a technology company and you have a particular SaaS product, then they will have a namespace or a path structure based on that product. So it wouldn't really matter what organization or restructure you do. It's always going to be centered around the products that the company offers. And then it can be a little less overhead, but that's not to say that's the best way to do it. You have to look at your organization. You have to decide, firstly, how much change is it, and is it a problem for you? With smaller organizations, it's not so much of a problem. When you have thousands of people and loads of different secrets at different paths, then it can get a little more tricky. So that's a key thing. And I think one other thing I'd say is when you're sort of designing your path structures and you're storing secrets in Vault, it's actually good to know what you have in Vault as well. So it's almost like a secrets register, if you like. Just like you would have an asset register and know where your assets are, you kind of want to know what secrets you have in Vault. And that can be useful for planning these things in the future.
Yeah, I completely agree. Starting very simple is usually obviously the best. You don't want to overthink this. Terraform is actually really great for, as Rob just mentioned about like knowing what's in there. because you can obviously use Terraform to manage like what authentication engines you have enabled, what secret engines you have enabled, and maybe more importantly, like what roles you have enabled. The way Vault works is you kind of, for many things like dynamic credentials, you create a role on the Vault side that says if someone were to authenticate with this role on the platform side, they would match up to this role on the Vault side, which has these policies. So Terraform does great at tracking those things and making sure those things are in the right place. About paths, another great thing about Vault is everything is path-based. So if you start really simple and you find that you need to grow or change some things, you can remount the same plugins just at different paths. You can't necessarily migrate your roles, your existing ones, but you could use Terraform to do some of that as well. Probably I would start with duplication and then remove the old ones personally, but you can have multiple, you can have the same engine mounted several times just at different paths. Yeah, I would absolutely just start very simple and grow slowly. There's no need to know perfectly right away what you're doing. So, and Terraform will help you with your configuration as far as like knowing exactly what's there for sure.
Right. I mean,
Awesome.
it's definitely a journey, you know. If you have no secrets management in place and the first thing you do is you go to static secrets, there's no sort of pressure to have dynamic secrets straight away. You can get to that if it suits your use case in due course, right? Just try to get your things inside Vault, and then if it works to have something dynamic, then you can over time migrate secrets to something that's a bit more just in time. And in terms of Terraform, a good use case for dynamic secrets is actually for the cloud provider authentication piece. So a lot of the time when you're creating resources in the cloud, you'd have to provide some kind of, I think in AWS, they call it an access key and a secret key or something like that. Most clouds will have a similar mechanism. Vault is really good at provisioning that dynamically for you. So if with every Terraform run, it will turn around and say, can I have a credential for this cloud so that I can provision these resources? And then that way, when it does that, it gets rid of the credential and there's no reliance on the resources that it's created on knowing what that credential is. It's actually not related. It's just Terraform's way of being able to talk to the cloud. And we don't have to worry about the blast radius of that credential. If it's exposed, then the attack surface is definitely more limited because it will be a short-lived credential. So that's a really good use case for it.
And so by investing the time to set up Vault to provide you with dynamic credentials, I think you have somewhat an upfront cost of engineering and making sure it works, but then your Terraform can more or less just chug along and you don't have to worry about leaking credentials or having to cycle credentials yourself. I think that's actually super useful. More people should be doing that.
To be clear, you have to worry less about those things. To be clear, because credential leaks can still happen, obviously. And if you have credentials that are valid for 10 minutes and they leak the first minute, obviously the risk isn't completely gone, but it is a significant contributing help, the fact that Vault will automatically revoke things without your interaction at all at the expiration. So, and to continue something that Rob mentioned too, like in my previous example about auto scaling and dynamic credentials, that there is a lot of upfront cost to that, and that is kind of a big step. And like Rob said, you could very easily start with things just in KV, right? So instead of distributing the credentials with your application that gets scales everywhere, like you could just have them ask for the KV value, which contains the secret. That could be a first step to moving towards dynamic credentials. The key point there is that you have removed the credentials from the applications and you've gotten them somewhere else. So you're not shoving them everywhere. They're not deploying them everywhere. They're not written down in a state file. Or a configuration file. They're securely involved. And that could be the first step, and you could probably ride that wave for a long time. It's still recommended you move to something like dynamic credentials, but it is a journey. And you're going to get there eventually. You don't have to jump in completely to dynamic secrets. You can take steps.
And so in the static secrets area, we've got versioning for the KVs, which I think is a super cool feature. Rob, can you share a little bit about the idea behind that and what you can do with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have obviously, I think we all know what a static secret is. It's a secret, right? It doesn't change. But with version 2 of the KV store, what you can actually do is you can rotate that secret. But what's really cool about that is it keeps previous versions of the secret still in the secrets engine. So you can pin so if you have an application, for example, which is going to pull that secret from Vault and it's relying on a particular version, you can kind of pin it to that version if you like. And when it's time to update it, you can point it to the new version of it. So you're not going to break your applications necessarily just by rotating that password, and you have the time to go through that process of rotating it. And that's the real benefit of having a centralized secrets management system. Is Vault is your source of truth here, and you still have the flexibility to be able to implement your security policy. So if it says that this password needs to change every 30 days, then you can go ahead and you can do that. Whereas with the first version of the KV secrets engine, that wasn't possible. So it's much improved, and it does provide a lot of security value to organizations, I'd say.
So what I'm hearing is that if I have my path structure set up in a way that works, but we realize that because of auditing reasons, we need to change the recipe of our passwords, maybe the length or the way we generate them, we can still use all of it. We essentially go into Terraform, change I believe it's a version attribute of the dynamic secret, the static secret, and we're good to go.
Yeah, it's just the version. You just need to tell it what version it is, and Vault will take care of the rest. It will serve that up, and yeah, when you're ready to update it to the newest version of it, then you can just go ahead and give it the new version, and that's absolutely fine. And just sort of pinning back to the path-based element of things, the good thing about the path-based is when you need to update your applications, you're not rewriting logic or anything like that. You're just giving it a new path. So like Clint said, if you're starting off with something that's static and then you want to move to a more dynamic approach, all you're ever going to do in your application is just change the path. You don't have to rewrite that logic. So that's really nice.
Not having to rewrite your infrastructure config is always nice. So we've got an audience question. Do I put my Vault provider config, Vault Terraform configuration for an application with the application Terraform, or do I keep it separately? I think this is a best practices question. And maybe we can go around and everyone answers it.
I think I understand the question. Assuming it's you have Terraform configuration to work on your application, but then you also want to configure the Vault aspects that application uses. Can you have all those together? The short answer is yeah, you can, but it does tie back to the concept of security as a spectrum and what you're comfortable with. If your application requires secrets that you want to inject into Vault and you are going to keep those secrets in the state file, there's certainly risk there. So it depends on what you want to keep in those files. So I wouldn't say blanket yes or no. If you feel like there's sensitive information that not everyone involved with the project, the application, more people might be involved with the application Terraform code than would be with the Vault side of it, I would keep them separate. I would keep that as a separate Terraform project. But then the burden is on you to make sure that all the infrastructure exists at the right time. Obviously, if they were in one configuration setting, that Terraform could do all that for you. It just depends on what you plan on keeping in there and who all has access to it and such. So in general, as long as you're not storing like sensitive information, like if you are putting in static secrets, like KV secrets that you don't want tracked in state or you don't want generally available to everybody, I would recommend it no. But if you're just defining like dynamic secrets, I think like roles for dynamic secrets, I think that would be totally fine. A caveat being there that in order to configure dynamic secrets, you usually need to provision a secret backend with like elevated privileges that can make those. So you want to be careful where those are kept. And I think there are other ways. Like for instance, a common practice is to configure a database user with elevated privileges that can create sub-users, and then immediately rotate that password so that the humans no longer have access to that password at all. Vault keeps it internally, and Vault doesn't return it to you. I don't know if the provider itself can do that. So that's a long-winded answer, but obviously you have to examine your case and decide what you're putting in there and make sure it's safe for everyone who's going to see it.
I think humans not knowing the secrets is always the best part, even if it's not always possible. Brings us to an interesting topic. Vault enables you to have a better workflow, I would argue, a more secure workflow, but it's still a workflow. If we're thinking about policies, Rob, what are your best tips for not making sure that you mess up your first policy?
That's a tough one. So there are things that people have tried. So at the end of the day, when you're writing your policy, what you're doing is you're writing the rules as to who should be able to do what, right? So by default, everything is going to be deny, and the policy will explicitly grant this or explicitly say that you can do these things except that, for example. So in terms of how do you make sure that your policy is accurate, I don't really have a silver bullet for that. There's a lot of testing that you can do. We don't actually have a specific testing framework that I'm aware of. I've long had dreams of some kind of BDD kind of test framework where you can kind of write your policies and then you can give this framework a bunch of scenarios and it can test against those policies there. But that doesn't exist other than in my head at the moment. So I think it's one of those things that policy writing is a skill. You do need to try it out quite a bit, and ultimately it is going to be about confidence and practice, and it is a risk. I don't really have a good answer for that, unfortunately.
With a lot of these things, I think it comes down to what works for your organization. What is your department requiring? Maybe what does the government require off of you? It's definitely hard. And looking at the folks that are joining us from literally all over the world today, we can definitely see that, if you're subject to local ruling and laws, then yeah, they might affect the way you use Vault. So let's see.
If I would add, the only other thing I could maybe add to that was actually touches back to our idea on paths before. It could make it more complicated to you. It depends on how comfortable you are with it, but you could leverage multiple paths with policies as well, if that makes it easier for you. One example I don't know that we covered before was the idea of using multiple paths. You could split that among teams. So you could have an AWS secret provider for one team at a certain path and another team at another path. That could just make it easier for the humans using it, possibly. It could make it possibly easier for the people who are writing the policies as well. It says, okay, this team can access these things at these path names and stuff. That could make it easier, as opposed to being more granular, saying, well, everyone's in the Amazon secret path, but your team has access to this role or these roles, and then your team has access to these roles. You could break it apart into different teams. By default, Vault gives people basically a policy of nothing, usually. If you're out there using Vault with the root credentials, please don't. Make yourself your own account to log in. As a developer, I often spin up Vault in a dev cluster, and so I'm always using the root account. That's a bad practice. But that's me developing. So you should, if you're an operator, you should definitely be using elevated credentials, but not like a hard-coded token. You should be authenticating in some fashion. A common way we use is through the GitHub organization, right? That gives us an easier organization. We have other single sign-on organization options as well. But so by default, your policies should start incredibly small. It's in my experience, and I think many other people's, it can be more painful this way, but it's better to have nothing and feel the pain of having to constantly ask for things than to have too many things and not realize it and have potentially too much power that could go bad. But it all depends on your organization, obviously.
Yeah, I think this will take many of us back to our first AWS IAM roles, where you just end up EC2:***, and everything among those lines, or the super admin role in GCP. So to clarify, the policy of nothing, is that akin to a deny by default?
Correct. You at that point, if you have that policy applied, you have the ability to authenticate with Vault, and you have no privileges to do anything. So there's authentication and then there's authorization. You are authenticated, but you are not authorized to do anything. I believe that's the default policy, which is obviously not very useful, but that's good. It's kind of like when you try to delete something in Vault, it'll say, hey, it was deleted if it existed. Like we're not going to tell you it existed. Just like if you were to ask for a secret you don't have authorization for, we're not going to tell you you don't have authorization. We're just going to say it's not there or you don't have access, you know? So yes, you start with nothing. You should start with nothing and then slowly get what you need.
And not returning if there was ever a secret like that, or if you don't have access to it, just prevents enumeration, which I think is always a nice way of keeping things a little more secure. So switching back to our audience questions, we've got one from Martijn asking, I've got multiple edge devices. Kubernetes serves them with one service account, and so a single Vault role. Every device needs different credentials, good, to access our API. How would I accomplish that with Vault?
I'm probably going to throw that one to Clint. I don't really have a good answer at the moment for that. I'd have to really look into that.
Okay.
Sorry,
can we replay the question again?
Absolutely. I'll also post it in our chat. And so I've got multiple edge devices, and Kubernetes serves them with one service account and a single Vault role. But every device needs different credentials to access our API. How would I accomplish this?
I guess I don't understand what these edge devices are. Are they in a Kubernetes pod? Are they in a cluster, or are they authenticating with Kubernetes?
That is a very good question. I'm hoping that Martijn is still here and will be able to provide us with a little bit of extra information.
So just when I hear the first part of like, they all need their own credentials, well, that's immediately my first thought is a dynamic credentials. And we, do we not have secret engine auth methods? Okay, so we do have Kubernetes auth method. The Kubernetes auth method allows you to authenticate with Vault using a service account that's found on the pods. And I'm not sure if that's what the question's being asked, because they said edge devices, and it made me think that they weren't in a Kubernetes cluster, so they wouldn't have this auth method. So there's two components of that. One, how are they authenticating to get that token? And two, what kind of access are they looking for? So normally when it's they all want their own credentials, you would think dynamic credentials. And I'm not actually seeing a Kubernetes like API type access dynamic secret here. So I'm not sure exactly how that would be done. I didn't see anything posted in a chat either reiterating the question. So I'm trying to find, and also, oh wait.
So they
every device needs different credentials to access our API. So that's not necessarily the Kubernetes API.
Yes.
Okay.
That's how I read that.
Okay. Single Vault role is likely fine. So
we've got an update to the question. Martijn is joining us in the chat. So the service account is linked to a single role, and every device has the same access to Vault, which isn't what Martijn wants, since every device needs its own credentials. And the API that he's referring to is indeed the company's API, not the Vault API or the Kube API.
So this sounds like something, because it's API access to the company API, then I'm thinking that this is like a secret engine, like a custom secret engine, because you want something that's going to the basics of a secret engine in this context would be assuming someone authenticates with a role, I'm going to provide them dynamic credentials, right? So the authentication engines just take something like what credentials you have, like the service account, right? And it says, oh, I authenticate as, you are authenticated as someone who can do this. I'm going to assign a role to you. Here you go. Here are your policies. You can access these things. That's all the authentication engines will do. And so you get a vault token that has those policies assigned. What you, in another situation, what you would do, or I'm sorry, continuing that situation, what you would use that vault token to then ask the secret engine, hey, give me dynamic credentials for this role, and here's my authentication token. And so the secret engine would then say, oh, you're this vault role, I'm going to tie you to a role that's been configured to have certain access in this company API. I will generate you dynamic credentials. So that would be a custom plugin, and Vault has a plugin API. We have Vault ships with many plugins built in, but some of them are actually, their code actually exists in external repositories. So you could go and basically mimic one of those. They're pretty easy to write. Our documentation on learn.hashicorp has guides on writing secret engines or writing plugins for Vault. The caveats are when you do compile it, it has to run on your platform. And all these plugins are written in Golang, so you can cross-compile them. It has to be in a predetermined folder when you start Vault. So Vault says, you have to tell Vault, hey, here's a folder of custom plugins, right? They live here. And when you start Vault, that folder has to exist. That binary has to be in there. And then after you start Vault, you have to continue and you have to register it. And you say, this is the command, this is the name of the plugin, the executable, and it has this MD5 checksum, or it's a SHA. It's a SHA of the binary, basically. And then you register it with Vault's catalog. And the reason you do that is so that when Vault starts, it wants to be able to detect if anything's changed in the binary, and then it'll refuse to run that plugin if that has changed from when you originally registered it. You can update it later if you need to. And then when that happens and you register it in the catalog, you can go ahead and mount it like a normal plugin. You say Vault enable and then your secret path, and then your secret engine will be mounted. So we don't have a generic dynamic secret account creator. The only thing even close to that would be we have the secret engine, the dynamic database secret engine, which will make dynamic credentials for common databases like MySQL and Postgres and stuff like that. But that's not for your API specifically. I believe you would have to write your own plugin for that. I hope that answered the question.
I think this was a beautifully detailed answer for a very specific use case. And Martijn, I'd like to ask you to join us on our forums on discuss.hashicorp.com. I've posted a link for you in our chat. Feel free to ask your question there and provide us a little bit more background. And usually you'll get an answer from either one of us or another community member. And so one of the things that Clint mentioned, Vault plugins, if you're interested to learn more about that, the Vault documentation is definitely a great start, especially if you have use cases that are very specific to your company, but you still want to use Vault as the source of truth, then this is a nice place to start. So let's get a link for that out as well.
Yeah, I think as long as the API is exposing the IAM layer, you should be able to use Vault to interact with that. Vault just needs the ability to be able to create, update, and delete user accounts there. And as long as it has that exposed in the API, you can definitely write something custom for that.
The extensibility, I think, is what makes Vault really interesting. Yes, we ship with a couple of providers. My personal favorite is just using GitHub because I never have to worry about that, no matter which cloud I use. But it definitely helps to be able to extend this on our own. I'm curious, Rob, are you working on any plugins at this point to make Vault life easier?
I'm not working on plugins specifically. What I am working on is a module for the Vault secrets engine. So it's more of a getting started kind of thing to help you just configure a series of secrets engines for your new Vault deployment. Obviously, as you scale, then your usage will change. But aside from that, I'm also working on another project on the side, which I call Target CLI. And pretty much what that does is it takes your, so if you're someone like me who looks after a lot of different Vault clusters, it can be quite difficult to kind of manage which Vault cluster you're talking to and keep track of what they're called, if they're IP addresses or DNS names and so on and so forth. So what Target CLI does is it allows you to capture these pieces of information into different profiles, and you can switch between them. So it's a bit like Kube Context, I guess, or AWS Command Line CLI has something similar where you can switch between different subscriptions. So Target CLI will do a similar thing with Vault, but I've actually extended it to some of our other products as well. So it will cover Nomad, Console, and maybe some new things that you're all excited to hear about next week at the conference.
So the conference Rob is referring to is Hashiconf, which is happening next week. If you haven't signed up yet, you definitely should. You'll be joining a couple thousand other people. We'll have very exciting announcements, 2 new products, the first time in half a decade. Yeah, there's not much we can say about that other than sign up on hashiconf.com. It's going to be a blast.
I believe it's free, right?
It is
Registration, because it's all virtual this year.
Absolutely,
so no reason not to.
You don't want to miss the sessions that we have. Rob and I were both in the speaker selection committee. We've seen a couple of very interesting sessions that are coming up. If you run your own community, we encourage you to check out the lightning talks, host your own meetup, host a virtual watching show. Definitely don't congregate with lots of people in the same place right now. And just check out what the new stuff is that we're going to be releasing. If you were lucky enough to join one of our workshops, we had, I think, Managing Secrets with Vault for Kubernetes and a couple of other Vault-related ones. At this point, they're all sold out, but you can definitely still join the waitlist and hope you get in. Otherwise, if you're taking some time off or just want to learn new skills, check out learn.hashicorp.com for our tutorials. We'll get a link to that up in a second. I think at this point we have a couple hundred tutorials there for all of our products, not just Terraform and Vault. So if you're looking to expand your skill and improve your workflow, that's definitely a good first step. Rob, I'm curious, how did you get started with Vault?
The answer to that question is kind of ironic that we're on a Terraform provider, community office hours. So I used to be a independent consultant, and I was brought in to one of my previous clients to help them re-terraform their infrastructure. They had attempted to do it themselves, and as it scaled, it got more complex, and they were struggling to kind of manage it. So I came in and did a discovery, and as I was looking at their code base, I could see all kinds of secrets sprawled all over the code base. Some of it was in GitHub. So I saw things that I probably shouldn't have seen. So I looked at it and said, okay, I know you hired me in to fix this, but you kind of have a more fundamental problem first that needs to be solved before I can do any of this. So I think we need to relook at the statement of works, and I think we need to look at secrets management. So it wasn't actually Vault that I came in there for. It was more Terraform. And Vault wasn't actually the obvious solution for me to go to. I just knew they had a secrets management problem. So it was about researching their workflows and trying to understand what products were the best fit. And it just so happened that Vault tends to come up top of that list in most places that you go. So yeah, I started implementing that for them. I made a bunch of mistakes, as you'd imagine, but able to fix them, thankfully. And I kind of took the journey from there. I started going to a lot of meetups, and I actually attended one of the workshops at Hashiconf EU. And it's kind of the rest is history. Here I am now, at Hashicorp, working on a tool that I love.
Working on things that you love is definitely one of the most rewarding things. And I think especially with the current way the world is, finding joy in your work is important. And I think for me, finding the most joy is easiest when I don't leak secrets. I know that seemed like a stretch, but realistically, I think we've all been there. And I hope that at the end of a month, we'll have an office hours where we're talking about some of the horror stories that we all encountered. Leaking secrets is definitely one of those. So you should definitely join us October 29th, right here on YouTube. Or afterwards, if you don't want to do the live watching, but it's gonna be a fun session.
I think you raise an interesting point there. So when it comes to security, a lot of the time, there seems to be a lot of focus on what the external threats are. People are worried about malicious actors outside the organization. But actually, we should be thinking about the internal threat as well. And that comes in a couple of different forms. You can have the disgruntled employee, for example, that may want to sabotage some systems, right? That's one thing that you need to protect against. But more commonly, you actually just want to protect against accidents. Like you said, we've all done something where we've committed some kind of secret somewhere that we shouldn't have done it, and most of us didn't do that intentionally. It was an accident, right? We're only human, which is why we need systems to help protect us against ourselves, I guess. So when you're designing kind of your security approach, yes, you definitely need to think about the threat from outside, but certainly you've got to think about the threat from within, and it's not always malicious.
Yeah, there's so many different threat vectors that you have to consider. And it definitely bears repeating that Vault is a tool that makes it easier to do this, but it's very much about the workflow that works for you, that works for your organization and for your team. And before you start using any tool, think about how you want to use it, where you are right now, where you hope to be a week from now, maybe a year, and what things you need to consider. So in the meantime,
to echo what Rob said about his previous work too, and what you said there, like it is very much a journey, and you can't go into having no Terraform or no Vault and thinking that, in a month or two, we're going to be completely Terraformed and completely Vault and all these things. Like, you're going to set yourself up for a lot of pain if you're going into it thinking that. So of course, take small steps, and like Rob said, he came in there for Terraform, and they realized, like, to get where you want to be, we have to do some other things that may seem unrelated, but they all fit into this picture. And Hashicorp has talked about that at large, the cloud operating model, and it really, the word journey has been used a lot. Like, you're going to start somewhere. Some people are farther along naturally than others, and just know that you can get to those places, but it's going to be really painful if you don't start small and take the right steps along the way.
I think that's what Vault and Terraform definitely have in common. You can start with both tools, start with maybe a single secret, maybe a single type of resource. Maybe you do all your storage or all your databases in Terraform, and then you scale up. Maybe you do, I don't know, the supporting CloudFront distribution, or your, well, maybe a little bit bigger resource, your Cube engine. I think it's not even just that Terraform and Vault share this. I think you ideally start with any of our tools like that. And that makes adoption, I think, a lot better.
I mean, as an independent consultant before, I had no loyalties to Hashicorp. So I never went to a client site and went there with the intention of selling them Hashicorp tools. That's not what I do. I look at problems and I try to solve problems in the best way possible. But what I did find over the years is that a lot of the Terraform products normally offer the path of least resistance and fit in nicely with existing workflows. Now, that's not always the case, but just in my experience, it happened to be the case a lot of the times. And that's one of the reasons why I love the tools. It really seems to think about how people use other tools, and it doesn't force you to work in a different way. It allows you to work in your own workflow. And Vault is no different to that. Terraform is quite the same as well.
So I'm wondering, we've got a couple minutes left. Let's see if we have new questions come in. In the meantime, I'm curious, Clint, what's coming up with a provider? What are the next steps?
Well, we have a couple things on the roadmap, but we don't also have like a dedicated team that works on the provider nonstop. So we're starting to pick up development on it. It had been kind of I hate to say maintenance mode, but it wasn't getting the attention it needed to. We had an engineer who was with us, and she paid regular attention to it. But before then, it was kind of not getting the attention it needed. So she started a wonderful process of actually starting to pick up more adoption and work on it. So continuing where she left off, I think we have plenty of technical debt to kind of address. Not necessarily bad. It's just we do have plenty of open like GitHub issues and comments that we need to just kind of address and clear up. I think a lot of them are resolved, but there are some other areas where we might have like perpetual diff things. But something I want to do in the future is standardize how some of our mounts are done, or some of our backends are done. Some of our backends require things like to use a Vault mount resource. And then once that's done, you configure like the other backend and say, oh, use this mount's path. Other backends don't need that mount, and they can do it all themselves. And so I want to standardize on that. I would rather standardize on the backends not needing the mount, but still enable people to use the mount, because I don't know every situation. So there could be situations where people want to explicitly configure the mount. There's other inconsistencies, like that mount approach gives you more options to tune it and control like default TTL things, time to live, but the actual backend might not. So I want to standardize those things. I'd like to get them more consistent across the backends. Another thing that was recently introduced by an engineer was we have a fledgling ability to generate resources and data sources based on Vault's exported open API formatted JSON of our API. So right now, there's a couple resources and data sources that are generated. And I think that's a really good path forward. Trying to get everything to be generated. I'm not sure we'll start replacing things, but I would like to see new things coming in using that. I think it needs a little bit of fine tuning, and it will as we use it more. But if we can generate these things, then I think that's better in the long run for us. But I do think we need to kind of standardize, like I mentioned, the Vault mounting inconsistencies first.
I think a more consistent workflow is always worth aspiring to. So 2 minutes left. Rob, I've got a question for you. Why should you use the transit engine? What benefits do I get from that? What dangers do I get myself into?
Okay, so let's just quickly give a quick couple of sentences on what the transit secrets engine is. So a lot of what we've talked about today is about secrets management. But the other thing you often hear people say about Vault is, oh, it also offers encryption as a service. And what they mean by that is the transit secrets engine. So in terms of why you should use it, I didn't say you should use it, but it definitely can help in a lot of situations. If your application is handling some data which needs to be encrypted, without something like Vault and the transit secrets engine, you would have to handle the logic of the cryptography within your application yourself, which is complicated. Cryptography is not the easiest thing to do. And because it's so complicated, it's easy to get wrong. And if you get that wrong, obviously your data is not as protected or even protected like you may think. So the good thing about the transit secrets engine is it allows you to kind of delegate the responsibility of that to something like Vault. cryptography is very well implemented in Vault. You can literally create your keys and Vault will manage that, and it will encrypt the data, and then you can store it wherever it's going to be stored. So it could be in a database or wherever your data store is. So if you're handling any kind of sensitive data, maybe it's something to do with the legislation, GDPR, I think we're calling it in the UK. I'm not sure what it's like in other countries, but you have a responsibility to protect your customers' data. So things like the transit secrets engine in Vault can definitely help you with that effort. So if you have any applications like that, you should definitely check it out, and definitely feel free to reach out to me if you want to know more about it.
And I think looking at the changelog, and Clint, you might know this, the transit data source was just added for the provider, right? Or they're coming in a next version, something like that.
Correct. Another Hashicorp member, I believe, someone on our cloud team, added data sources for encrypting and decrypting. So again, like data sources, and transit doesn't store these things in Vault, so that's why they're both data sources. You can either give it a plain text and the data source will return ciphertext, or you can use the decrypt, and where if you have the ciphertext, you can put it in the data source and it'll decrypt it for you, and you can use it in other resources as needed. But that was merged recently, and a target release is next week, tentative. That's the plan. We don't have a hard date for it, but next week's the plan.
Awesome. And with that, we're at the end of our office hours for today. Feel free to join us not next week for office hours. Definitely join us for HashiConf. But 2 weeks from now, we'll be talking about something new and exciting. And thank you too for joining us, Clint, Rob. Thank you for filling our questions.
Thanks for having me.
And with that,
pleasure. Thank you.
Have a great rest of your day, rest of your night, or early morning. See you soon.